The Unconventional Therapist's Guide to Nothing.
Hey everybody, welcome to The Unconventional Therapist. My name is Dave. I'm joined here with my co-host, Greg. Greg, how are you?
I am doing fantastic.
That's awesome.
You know,
you were gonna say more too. Go ahead.
I was just gonna say that I'm running on an hour's sleep, and I wasn't gonna say that, but you asked me for how I'm feeling, and so I'm feeling a little tired.
I didn't ask you that. I didn't.
But I'm gonna turn this ship around. I'm charged up because
you're saying a lot of stuff.
Oh, too much?
I didn't ask you any of this.
Okay, all right.
I said how you doing. That's just a formality.
Listen, you're not being very loving and peaceful. And we're talking about something here, or someone who. All right, let me ask you this. We're going to go approach this from a different angle this time. When you think of Mother Teresa, before any of this work that you did, what came to mind?
Sainthood? Like do-gooding?
Do-gooding, okay. Wow. You really used to put in some thought with
I don't know. I guess just, like everything. Just what's the word I'm looking for? Like, we talk about like altruism, and I've said before how I don't believe it exists. Well, if I were to believe it exists, this would be like my definition of altruism. It would have been Mother Teresa from what I previously thought.
Yeah, me too.
Before I read about all the scandals.
Well, listen, and I think that we might land in different areas in this, because I think there's those who would call this saint a sinner almost, I think. Wouldn't you say?
I mean, it's definitely, I think it's almost been said.
It's definitely been said, and she's a complicated figure, and I think that's what makes her fascinating.
Yeah.
I really do. I'm not convinced that she is. I mean, some people really believe that there was like a darkness to Mother Teresa, and there are some valid arguments to talk about when it comes to that. There's some serious critiques, but I think on some level, I don't know. It was needed where she was working, and the work that she was doing was so difficult that it had to harden her in a way to be able to continue the actual work.
Yeah. So for everyone that's tuned in and they listen to us get into this way too fast, we are talking about Mother Teresa today on this episode, and we are going to dive in a little bit of who she is, I guess, just like a quick overview of her life. I guess we'll talk about her mission.
Mm-hmm.
Well, we'll definitely talk about her mission. I don't know if we'll get to like her accomplishments or anything like that. But what we do want to talk about, though, is I guess some of those controversial views that some people had of her mission, and just whether she was an authentic person or if there was a little bit more than met the eye, I guess.
I don't know if we're going to gain popularity by, I was just thinking about this, thinking of the most beloved human being on the planet and throwing some shade at them.
But it looks like we are certainly not the first or the last people to do so. I don't know that we're necessarily going to throw shade at it.
I'm not.
It's all stuff that's pretty well documented and it's been in books. I mean, come on.
Yeah. I mean, pretty well documented, but also at the same time, I really wasn't aware of it.
Yeah.
All right. So what do you think? You want to start us off at young daughter Teresa?
You mean young Agnes?
Sure. Yeah.
She was born Agnes. All right. So what's the sound when you have an X in someone's name? What's that sound like?
Yeah.
Like that?
Yeah. Z. Sometimes it's a Z.
One of those. All right. Agnes Gansha.
Bahashu.
Bahashu?
Yeah. That's definitely not it.
No?
No. Just say Agnes.
Agnes. She was born Agnes in Uskup, Ottoman Empire, which is now Skopje.
Wow.
North Macedonia.
Yeah.
What? Why was that all in one like sentence? That was a setup for failure right there. She was born on August 26, 1910. around the time that Greg set his his personal look for.
That's very funny, Dave. You're off about a decade.
All right, hold on one second. I gotta get that one out. All right, at age 12, she felt strongly that she was called by God, and she knew she had to be a missionary to spread the love of Christ. At age 18, pretty normal age for people to fly the coop. She left her parents and she joins the Sister of Loreto or
Yeah.
Loreto, I don't know, an Irish community of nuns with missions in India.
Hold on a second there. Like, how do you conceptualize that? Because I've heard that before in the past. When you have a calling to something, like now, I've heard my cousin is a priest,
Okay.
and he talks about this, like having a calling to priesthood. Now, is that? Do you think? What do you think of that as? Do you think that's like genuinely like they hear something in their head, or like how do you? Did you have a calling to be a therapist? Like, how does that work?
Yeah.
Okay,
I did.
yeah, you
Yeah, I
did.
did. Yeah, I
And then
did.
what? Okay, all right. So now, what did that look like?
One day I was like, oh my God, I got to become a therapist. I
What
shouldn't
did?
say, I shouldn't say, oh my God, that's blasphemous, but
Yeah, I mean, come on. But wait, no,
oh my
did you?
gosh.
So you did have a moment where you were like, okay, this is it for
No,
me.
not at
No, I
all.
know,
Not at
and
all.
so that's the thing. I think most people don't enjoy that direction. Like, we all have these jobs, but it's like, I knew I wanted to be.
This isn't a job, Greg.
That's lifestyle.
This is God.
You're right. You're right. So
Is that different?
she's saying that Jesus spoke to her. Are we worried?
Did she say Jesus spoke to her, or did she
She
say
did. She said that Jesus spoke to her and made it kind of clear what he wanted her to do, and that was
Okay.
to work with
All right. Well, Jesus didn't speak to me to tell me to be a therapist, so I had a different experience in my journey. But good for her. Good on her.
Yeah.
Did was it your cousin? You said did Jesus speak to your cousin?
No, he might
Is your
claim
cousin still a priest?
he is. Yeah.
How's that going?
I don't know. I haven't seen him in a while. Yeah. I don't like the crowd seeing that. No, I'm just kidding. So this is what she's quoted as saying. I was to leave the convent and help the poor while living among them. It was in order. It was in order. And to fail would have been to break.
So this is later.
Yeah.
So that's not like what got her into it. That's not that initial calling to.
Oh yeah, this is her calling to like her very specific duty.
So that's later though. So like
Okay.
that initial call to God, I wonder what that was like, because you're saying it became clear to her. I think that to me would be more easily explained by the fact that she's like surrounding herself. She's at the she's in that community of nuns. She's getting trained in Dublin for months. She goes to India in like 1931. She becomes a nun. So, she's surrounding herself in that lifestyle. She was a teacher at St. Mary's High School in Calcutta from 1931 to 1948. And then when she's there, she starts to see like the poverty outside of the school walls. And she feels just like very deeply compelled to try to help. Like it seeing that level of poverty really left an impression on her. So
yeah, and when we're talking about Calcutta or like places like in India, it's like this is the slums and the level of poverty is staggering, and we'll talk about that later on. Yeah, and I think partially for Mother Teresa, she's obviously like this very smart, driven woman, like even at a very young age, and I think maybe the call to this religious order is it gives her a chance to use her skills that she wouldn't really have had a chance to in 1910 or 1920 or 1930. She's able to have a leadership position. She's able to kind of like work where she can grow and maybe be in a leadership role.
But this begins at 12.
I know, but maybe she's a driven little girl. She knew it.
So you're pretty much saying that there's no chance that she felt a strong connection to spirituality or to God, and that was solely the reason she goes in this direction.
I'm
You're
not saying
thinking it was for power.
I'm not saying it's for power. I'm thinking that played a role, and I think it was a nice kind of easy segue into something, because that was a huge part of her life. And she knew at a very young age, maybe she's looking at the women around her and she doesn't want to take these submissive roles. She wants to create something. She wants to be something bigger.
Hmm.
And she does.
It's funny because like, so if you think about what that entails to be called to something like that right there, if that's a real thing, if it's a real thing,
Mhm.
I am stating I was never called to anything. So I don't, as far as I know, I don't think I was called to anything. And if I did, maybe like I sometimes I can't hear so well. So maybe
Yeah,
I just
maybe you missed the
it.
call.
Yeah. I think I listened to Wu-Tang Clan too loud in high school in my car. So my eardrums are all blown. But anyways, I don't know what that's like, but I would imagine feeling called, especially feeling called by God the way that is described, that must give you a level of responsibility that you feel you need to achieve. Like you're not just any Joe Schmo. You're now like being told this is what you're supposed to do. This is the life that you're supposed to go is this direction. So now
And
it's
if
almost like you have to go with like seriousness and like make something of it. You can't just go and be like the bottom level nun, whatever that is.
right,
You have to be the flying one.
that's right. You have to be the one with those sweet white and blue robes. So and if someone's talking to you, Dave, and saying that in your office, you might be thinking of like a grandiose delusion. And if someone, and maybe that's a problem, because if someone had told Mother Teresa, "Hey, look, like this is a delusion of yours. Like you're not. No one's speaking to you."
Yeah. I disagree. I would you say if someone told you they had a calling to something that they
No,
felt like
absolutely not. What I mean is, if
I
someone
don't
said, like, Jesus said, I have to do this.
yeah. We're talking about two different things though.
Yeah, I guess so. Well,
I'm
and you know what I want?
really focused on that calling piece at 12 years old. That's such an early age. And I guess that maybe my mind isn't able to totally understand maybe what the surrounding situation looks like. Like think because I mean, all right, we're looking at it from the standpoint of like today and the importance that like society seems to put on religion today in this specific area here where we
Right.
are, like it feels way less intense than maybe what it was in northern Macedonia, where she was at that time. I don't know. So for me, a 12-year-old saying they feel called the calling, right, to serve God, I would in today's society, I would be like, wow, that's impressive. Like, what made you think
Well,
of that? Maybe
here's
it
something.
wasn't that impressive. I don't
Well,
know.
here's something. Yeah, here's something that challenges that a little bit. So I think when we're 12 years old or thereabouts, when we're children, we know what we want to do more than we will for the rest of our lives. We know the things that make us happy. We know exactly what it is that we think will fit our personalities. But then as we get older, we start allowing in, well, you can't do that because of this, or these limiting beliefs that kind of get in the way of this thing that you really always want to do. I'm sure that when you were a kid, you wanted to be something. And then at some point, someone told you, well, you can't do that because of this. Or maybe you told yourself, I can't do that because of this. You know what I mean?
Therapist. I wanted to be a therapist.
Well, look
Yeah.
at that. You've you
That's
there
why
you
it
go.
took me so long to eventually become it.
You're like brother Teresa.
So, and it's interesting. There's 6 years before she actually like goes out and does it. I wonder what those 6 years looked like for her. Also, good for her. She had that feeling at 12 and still follows through with it 6 years later when she leaves. I think that says something about her.
Yeah.
Decisiveness, drive. I guess probably other adjectives that go along with that.
That's plenty.
Sure.
Yeah.
But there's something there. Dedication.
So let's talk a little bit about
Faith.
what is the difference between her being in this one order and then shifting on to the next stage. Like the missionaries of charity is like kind of what she's known for, right?
So she teaches in Calcutta from like 1931 to 1948. And then 1948, after she sees that poverty and it makes such an impact on her and she feels like she needs to do something, she receives permission from her superiors to leave the convent school and then she devotes herself to work among the poor in the slums of Calcutta. She has no funds at this point. She's depending on divine providence and starts an open air school for poor children. She joins volunteer helpers, and they just continue to look for financial support, and that financial support ends up helping like expand the nature of her work and what she's able to do. And then in October of 1950, she received permission from the Holy See to start her own order of missionaries of the charity, which you were just mentioning.
So the Pope, essentially.
Yes. Well, the Pope in 1965 is the one that her society becomes an international religious family by a decree of Pope Paul VI in 1965. So yeah, she becomes recognized by the Pope and all that stuff.
So like this missionaries of charity, like I think it's important to mention the kinds of people that she's servicing here. Like
it's the poorest of the poor. It's their primary task is to love and care for those persons that nobody was prepared to look after.
And
so people
we're talking
can't
about
get treatment anywhere.
We're talking about people with HIV. We're talking about people with leprosy, tuberculosis. So before we, when we get down the line and we start having critiques, I mean, before we judge this person too harshly, let's think about maybe 3 years ago or 2 years ago when someone would sneeze around you and it was basically an assault. And I have to admit, Dave, I know we've both been in these situations. And even recently, very recently, we've had people in our rooms with COVID and been like, man, that was tough. Like, I wonder, why they would put us through that. But it's like, here's someone choosing to get in rooms and work with people. Leprosy? I mean, that's like biblical plague type things. Tuberculosis, that's consumption. That's, a ticket to death. And AIDS. So, I mean, for her to just dig in with people, like it's not only the poorest of the poor, it's the sickest of the sick. It's the most contagious, which I think is a factor that people don't really think about that much. That's a tough thing. That's a tough ask to work with that population. Don't you think?
A really tough demographic.
It really is. The trifecta, really.
So, yeah, I mean, there's some major criticisms that start to come out. There's these 3 names in particular that seem to be responsible for a lot of the bigger criticisms that we get, at least as far as them being like published or in vocal in interviews, which is somewhat crazy too, because like critiquing Mother Teresa is kind of like critiquing the Catholic Church, right?
Mm-hmm.
So, I mean, when they're taking on Mother Teresa, they're taking on more than just Mother Teresa. And I think that's very clear.
Yeah, absolutely. And what do you think about, like, let's talk about some of these critiques and let's talk about whether we think they're fair or unfair and who and where they're coming from.
Yeah. So there's these authors. Chatterjee is an Indian author. He's one of them. So he briefly worked in one of her homes and he investigated the practices of her order. And then you have these 2 British journalists, Christopher Hitchens and Tariq Ali. And they both produced this highly critical British Channel 4 documentary called Hell's Angel, which is based on Chatterjee's work. So the documentary basically highlights what they say is her exploitation of the poor. Ironically, I guess it's not that ironic. None of the individuals who they care for, who are cared for in any of her missionaries, are actually interviewed or speak on camera. So that's one thing that they have going against them. I guess on the flip side, you could say if they're in their homes, they are dying.
Yeah.
So that's maybe explains a little bit of it. Although not everybody that was in her homes was actually dying. We do learn that from some cases.
So this is someone who I think of as soon as I started reading and thinking
which
about.
One are you talking about? Hitchens?
Christopher Hitchens, right?
Yeah,
I mean, first of all, Hell's Angel, that's not great. I consider him like almost like a devil's advocate.
The word devil's advocate gets tossed around quite a bit when people are talking about her. Like I saw some podcast episode use the phrase devil's advocate as like the title when they were talking about her and things like that.
They use the term devil's advocate when talking about her.
Yeah.
Really?
or maybe they were when they were talking about the
Him, like,
criticism
yeah, criticism.
on her. So yeah, I think that term's been tossed around a few.
Do you want a little fun fact?
What's that?
Do you know where the term devil's advocate comes from?
Mm, nah, let's just move on.
Okay, I gotta tell you now. So that that whole process when they're picking a new pope, there's someone when they do pick someone, there's a person who's going to critique that specific cardinal, and that's his role. He's called the devil's advocate.
Huh,
He shoots
interesting.
down the it is kind of interesting. So, anyways, not to get you off topic here. Yeah, like so, what are sort of the criticisms that they're talking about?
Well, one of the things that they were able to get though is they actually were able to get some former volunteers. There are some sources that are actually like involved in the homes and stuff like that to kind of talk about the conditions, I guess. So one was this writer and former volunteer at the Home for the Dying, and she was interviewed saying that the place reminded her of photos she had seen in a World War I facility, saying that it lacked comforts and there was lack of medications given. Like basically, they lacked even giving things other than like aspirin. Like the get a painkiller, I guess, was kind of a not definitely like just a regular thing. So that was definitely a criticism. The lack of actual medical expertise, I think, was part of the criticism. They had like cots or like hammocks instead of beds.
Yeah.
So like, you know, when you're talking about conditions of a hospital or a hospice, like that's not necessarily what you would want to see. Some of the other stories though are a little bit more concerning, like the needles not being sterilized. There were some people there that were sick but probably treatable and didn't belong there in the house of the dying. Like there's a 15-year-old boy who should have been sent to the local hospital, but they reported that the nurses refused to send him. Um, there was a UK medical journal in 1994 that reports that even the most basic life-saving drugs were not administered to patients who could be treated and should have been admitted to a hospital rather than the famous Home for the Dying, things like that.
So maybe something's going on here where I know that part of Mother Teresa's thought process on this is the suffering itself brings you closer to Jesus. Like there's meaning at the end of your life of suffering. Maybe like this is a way to purge your soul or to bring you closer to God, closer to heaven. And honestly, we've talked about it before, and suffering on some level does make you a better person. And I think that this is a weird way to look at it, but I don't know. Do you think that do you think that she was thinking of it in terms of cruelty, or do you think that she was thinking the suffering here is necessary and it's bringing meaning to their life and it's going to ensure them their afterlife?
So to answer this is also to kind of hit on another critique, and that's where you're getting with the suffering, because she would call the suffering Jesus kissing the person.
That's
And instead of treating the suffering, it was like more of a acceptance of the suffering, which depending on the suffering, we could relate to, because there is a level of acceptance that, even if in like the therapeutic setting, we would talk to someone about acceptance of their suffering if it's something that you knew was unable to be changed.
yeah.
But we're talking about something different. We're talking about something that's able to be changed, because if you give the person an ibuprofen, suddenly they might not be suffering, or if there's a medication that could be given, they're not suffering.
Yeah, what about the idea too that, there's another critique when it was to carry on with the suffering thing is, towards the end of her life when she was in pain and suffering and needed the best medical attention, she ensured that she got it, which is not great.
So there's this whole idea about her, and I think we're going to kind of have to come back to some of these things. There's this whole idea about her being sort of a hypocritical personality.
Mm,
Towards the end of her life, actually, when she was passing, I guess she had requested that all correspondence and all her writings be destroyed.
right.
And they actually didn't. and they released some of her writings, after she passed. And what was learned about Mother Teresa was that she was starting to actually feel disconnected from God.
Right. Yeah, and some of the
And
letters she actually even mentions being, having a crisis of faith, like losing, like maybe she doesn't even
yeah,
believe that there is a God.
so there's this phrase called "dark night of the soul,"
Okay.
and that it's like basically it's a spiritual crisis when one feels disconnected from God or a lack of spiritual feeling. So there's this idea that she was preaching so heavily about something that maybe she wasn't even really feeling. And does that make her authentic? Or does that mean she's being disingenuous and she's just, cashing in on this endeavor that she has, on her, what makes her money, I guess, the thing that gives her fame. Like
Well,
in order for her to be genuine, would that mean she has to be like, you know what, I don't believe in this anymore, so maybe this all shouldn't still exist and we should just close our doors?
well,
Like, is that
listen.
the answer?
No, I don't think it is. I think it's a little more complicated than that. And I think maybe you have to try to get a little more philosophical. And so think about it in terms of goodness. Like you can't be good unless you have the capacity for evil. So you have to like choose to be good. Now, can you be faithful if you never have any doubts? Like if you were completely sure about something, is is that impressive, right? I think the fact that she had this faith and she had these concerning doubts and they bothered her so much. It's almost like an intrusive thought, right? Like I don't want to have these feelings. I don't want to have these thoughts, and it made her feel empty and scared and nervous.
Well, Greg, if what we're talking about here, how long do you think this was going on? These doubts?
I think that I read somewhere for decades.
Decades.
Yeah.
Now that's more than just a doubt.
No, I know. But the fact is though, Dave, the fact remains is you she's actively living her life. So I guess there's two ways to look at it. You can look at it like she's actively living her life based on the faith that, or the hope or the faith that something does exist, but she has doubts, but she's still, putting her faith in putting her whole life and her existence into the work for Jesus. Now, I guess your question is she doing this for Jesus or is she doing this for Mother Teresa? And I guess that's the question there. And then there's really no way of knowing that.
I don't know if the answer is she's doing it for Mother Teresa and she's doing it for herself because, for what, let's say it's for some like selfish reason.
Yeah.
Not saying it is, but let's say it is. What would be the responsible course of action at that point?
She doesn't have one. She is limited to what she can do, because if she comes out and she says, "Listen, I'm having a crisis of faith," not that's going to be damaging to so many of like faithful followers. It's going to make so many people lose hope.
But what she could do is she could go get some medicines and make those people stop suffering. If that was,
Yeah.
if they are suffering because of some belief she has about needing to suffer to be closer to Jesus or something along those lines, she could say, well, hey, maybe that's BS, and let me go get you some medicine so you're not suffering. I'm not saying any of this is truthful because we don't really know. Like,
Right,
I
but she
don't.
could be doubting it. Like she could be like doubting it and saying, "Oh, I don't know if this is quite sure. I think this. I want to believe this, and I hope this." And maybe she doesn't want to take away from the possibility that it could be true that this
Yeah.
suffering is bringing these people closer to God. And I think maybe not always, but she helped so many more people than she hurt, and she gave people meaning at the end of their life. It's hard to hate on that.
I think the more concerning part of that with her is not so much the doubt or the feeling of disconnectedness, because I think that in most people's lives, they go through moments where they might feel disconnected or they might start to question. And I know you're not supposed to if you're someone of faith like her. You are supposed to just believe and have faith the entire time. So, to someone else, that might be a big issue. The thing that I think is more problematic is along with that feeling of disconnected, she makes a lot of statements about just not having the motivation for the efforts to to do the work that she was doing.
Mhm.
So it's almost like she's just going through the motions.
Yeah.
And that part, I think, is the more concerning of the two, because you can feel disconnected and still know, like, all right, I know I'm supposed to be doing this. I know, but like, it almost feels like even if she did feel disconnected, and she wouldn't have considered if she should make a change because she just didn't have the motivation. She didn't have the energy to make these efforts. Who knows? Who knows why? Maybe she felt like, what's the point? Nobody seen, like, when she's getting she's getting critiqued for doing this kind of work. You got to wonder if that starts to make her feel a sense of doubt. Like, am I doing the right thing? Is there a point to this? Like, I
Well,
would
what about
assume.
this? You're right, but think about this, and even you're right, because I noticed when I pulled up one of these quotes from one of these letters, and it says, quote, "Nothing touches my soul." Now, if that doesn't sound like,
She's depressed.
depression and
Yeah, yeah.
emptiness, yeah. But the thing is, though, you know what it also sounds like? Burnout.
Oh yeah,
How long has she been in Calcutta with HIV and leprosy
sure.
and all these things? And it's like, you've been treating for these people and taking care of these people for so long, and maybe being around this level of, I don't know, sickness and, death, it kind of hardens you. And maybe the outside looking, and maybe some journalist, some hotshot Christopher Hitchens comes in and is like, hey, like, you're kind of being a jerk to these people. And it's like, dude, I've been doing this for 40 years. Like, yeah, maybe like this people dying all around me, like it seems a little callous the way I approach this now, but I've been in this for 40 years, and you're writing a couple notes and just kind of doing your little picture, and you're going to leave. I
Yeah,
don't that it's sort of like unfair in a way. Um
I would love to know the money flow aspect of it,
yeah, that's
because
probably
it's,
got something to do with it.
you
You
know,
think you think she was hoarding money?
no, well, I would love to know, because she started with nothing, right? She's starting with just like donations and
Yeah.
collecting and all that stuff. And, she's establishing these homes, multiple homes that cost money.
Yeah.
Having a place to be able to do this work costs money. Is she really, you know, taking home money after that? Is anybody really profiting off of this work that she's doing? Does that have something to do with why? I mean, by 1994, you would think that they would be in a good place as
Mm.
far as being established and be able to afford some beds and not just be in hammocks. But, does that have something to do with it? The other part of
Follow the
this,
money idea, yeah. Okay.
Hitchens ends up doing like a follow-up, and it's called the missionary position. Oh my goodness.
Oh, wow.
I actually
Freudian.
didn't even read that out loud before I said it
He
earlier.
likes those. He's a robe guy.
The missionary position, Mother Teresa in theory and practice. He repeats all the accusations he made in the documentary, but he actually describes her organization as a cult that promoted suffering and did not help those in need. And something that doesn't help is in 2003, she's what is did you I don't know what this word is. I've never heard this word before. Beatified. It had
Um,
something to do with how they treat them after death, and through the church. I forget what it is. It's like almost like speaking them into heaven or something along those lines.
yeah.
I don't really totally understand it. But that John Paul II does that, and that only fuels Hitchens' criticism more. He's calling her a fanatic, a fundamentalist, and a fraud. He throws criticisms over the Catholic Church for recognizing um, the recovery of one of her patients that they state was due to a miracle, even though they heard, there was testimony from the patient's doctor that attributed the recovery of the patient to modern medicine. So that is something I heard, is like,
are you
there's a
talking
lot
about?
of,
Are you talking about her how she cured the incurable tumor?
yeah, I guess, but
Yeah, that's how she was sainted.
yeah, then that's what I'm talking about here.
Yeah.
So that, the doctor, I guess, there's testimony that the doctor said the recovery was from the medicine, and the church recognizes that as a miracle. There's also like a lot of her story feel like, I think people feel like the church kind of utilized her
Yeah.
as like a way to draw people in.
Oh, of
Like,
course.
look at this saintly
Marketing.
woman. But it's almost like marketing,
Yeah,
right?
yeah. And then
And
also the church was like, no, dude, trust me, she's not giving them medicine.
yeah, yeah.
You know what I mean?
Well, no,
So,
he must have been getting medicine for a doctor. It was the patient's doctor.
right. I just mean like that's her reputation. And well, it's funny though. I would wonder about the money thing too, but it's like you talked about and I remember you talking about this in the Seven Deadly Sins episode a million years ago. If the money wasn't for her to stack up somewhere and create, like if the money was used for more, places to care for these patients, that I don't think that's greed. I don't think that's a problem, is it? Or you're saying that
No,
she wasn't using the money to make the better places?
I don't know that there was money. I don't know how much money. That's what I'm saying.
Yeah.
I wish I knew what the money flow situation looked like, because it would be, I think that would say a lot. If there could show that the money that was, collected and raised was just literally going to make more homes and into the care, then hopefully that would get people to understand, that this person, I have a hard time envisioning this person being someone who's like walking away with the money and like spending it lavishly. I don't think
Right.
that was her lifestyle or her beliefs at all.
So what about the idea that he brings up as far as like it being culty? Now, I did listen to maybe a year ago when I first thought maybe we might do something on this. I listened to this Turning Point podcast, and I do remember a lot of talk about the members of the missionaries of charities, the other nuns. They had to deal with a lot of mortification, which is basically like punishing themselves so that they're not lustful and they don't want anything but what Jesus, what they can do for Jesus. And they would flagellate, they would hit themselves, and it was very strict. But I think that it was no stricter than maybe I was thinking about it when I was listening, like maybe these are like the Marine nuns. It seems like they were being put through this really rigorous discipline training, maybe not for nothing, maybe because she knows how much she's burnt out, maybe because she knows how difficult the work is, and you're going to need some tough people to be able to handle what's in store for this specific order. I think that plays a role in this. And I think maybe his critiques, maybe some are founded, but I think maybe some, if you explore them a little bit, it's dialectic, right? We can look at it both. Two things can be true at once. Like, yeah, maybe this is a little dark, but maybe there's a reason for this. And maybe you're looking at it from this angle, but you're not really, taking into account, how difficult this was for her.
It's also not her fault how the church portrays her.
Mm-hmm.
And if they want to take an opportunity to be like, oh, look at this woman, people seem to really, be gravitating towards her. She does all this great work. We can utilize her as like this saintly figure. And that might draw in attention to the church. That's not her fault if that's how the church portrays her. Like there was this thing where like, they were getting a picture of her and there was like this light coming in and they're like, oh, it's the divine light. It's like, she's not doing this. This is just how they're portraying her to, for a purpose, for their purpose. Right.
Yeah. And
I'm not saying that's wrong either, because
I know.
honestly, that gets done everywhere. Like every entertainment. Look at, look how we glorify people in entertainment and in sports and things like that for their abilities. And we utilize people's talents to make something more popular. Like, I can't blame the church for doing that either. If they see people are gravitating to this woman and you see the amazing things that she's doing.
Yeah. And I think on some level with the Christopher Hitchens thing, I don't know, he kind of bothered me a little bit because he seemed kind of pretentious, but I think there's that old saying, like, those who don't create criticize. So it's maybe there's like a deeper thing that he had an issue with the Catholic Church and he saw this, maybe she's a target. And I think that there's just so much. So there's another reporter that went there and he was from the Atlantic, which is another really important magazine. Right. And he went to Calcutta and he went to one of these open air, places where people were suffering and dying. And this man had come who had been, he hadn't been bathed in 10 years and he was brought into this facility. Right. And so he's got sores and he's got these gnarled fingernails, and Mother Teresa and her, her nuns, they had to do some really painful things to this person. They had to kind of like pull his like you can imagine like his legs stuck to itself and they had to like pull that all apart. And this guy's in excruciating pain. And then, and if this isn't a saintly move, she hands this salve or like this kind of like cream to the reporter and says, now make him love you. Right. So it's like we created this suffering for him. We did the things that we had to do. We handled this for him. And now you can make him love you. You can feel like you've done the purpose there, because as soon as you start putting that cream on him, this dude's going to be like, oh God. So yeah, was she a little callous? Sure. But try to remember the absolute deplorable conditions she's been working in she's like 1,000 years old, like for her entire life since she's like 18 years old. Right.
Mhm.
I mean, she has this great quote too. She says, find your Calcutta. And that really stuck with me. So it's like, you don't have to go to work with HIV patients and tuberculosis patients and, leprosy patients, which, by the way, if you find yourself doing that day in and day out, maybe you are a saint and maybe there are some kind of like divine lights in your pictures. I don't know. But I just think that we can all take that message, like find your Calcutta. And maybe, Dave, I think, on some level, we've had these chats before and we try to do that. We try to do the best for the people that we can, even though we know at times that like it does create burnout for us. It makes us tired. And we were just talking about that before we got on. Like it makes meaning in our life and it creates meaning in our life. But maybe sometimes, sitting across from everyone's darkness all the time, it is heavy. And maybe that does make you, callous to something sometimes. It's easy to see. It is.
So there's one other pretty big criticism
Okay.
About her, and it has to do with forced baptisms. And that's something that would be interesting to hear, if what you think of this, because I think it's kind of easily explainable, but it just sounds really bad, like forced baptisms.
Yeah.
But it does cause a much bigger issue. So I'll explain. Again, it's Hitchens again. He's saying that Mother Teresa encouraged members of her order to secretly baptize dying patients without regard to the individual's religion. Supposedly, the sisters had to ask the patient who was potentially dying if they wanted a ticket to heaven, which was if it was met with like a positive response. So, like, let's say they nod their head, they blink their eyes twice. I don't know what they had to do.
Yeah.
It signified that they were going to give them a baptism. So the sister was would pretend she was just cooling off the patient's head with a wet cloth, but she was actually baptizing them, saying whatever they have to say when they do the baptism. And it had to be done in secret because it could not be known that they were baptizing Hindus and Muslims.
Yeah. So I guess that all kinds of comes down to the question of we'd have to be in her mind to know the depths of her crisis of faith, right? Because if she's baptizing people, but why would she do it unless she truly believed she was saving their soul?
So if these allegations are true, it would be a breach of the Missionary of Charity's Constitution, which states it is never lawful for anyone to force others to embrace the Catholic faith against their conscience.
Okay, but hold on. Let me explain. Let me say this to you. Say someone's rushed to the hospital and they can't make a decision on whether or not like it's okay to like cut their clothes off or whatever it is. Like you have to do in an emergency situation. Maybe that's the way she's looking at this. This is an emergency situation. This person's dying, and if I don't make a move here, potentially this is a soul damned to hell.
Are you taking people who could potentially be at their most vulnerable and possibly not even fully have their wherewithals, right?
Mm-hmm.
And are you exploiting that?
I suppose in some level you are. And maybe that could be really damaging to the family too if they find out. It's making me think of sons.
Well, so, one argument was that the patients were not provided enough sufficient info to make an informed decision about whether they wanted to be baptized and the theological significance of the Christian baptism. Greg, you're forgetting these are not Christians. These are not people who maybe even understand what this means, what this baptism means.
Okay.
There's a general, we both understand what it means to be baptized.
Oh, I see what you're saying.
That's because we're born into this religion. We understand it. If I'm not part of this religion, if I'm a different religion, do I necessarily know what the significance of a baptism means? And do I have that amount of time to learn that or fully discuss that with you if I'm dying? Like, is that the time we're going to talk about that? And you can't even talk to me about it because guess what? You have to do this in secret. And you're just asking me if I want a ticket to heaven. And of course, I'm saying, yeah,
Hell yeah.
yeah, guy, do
But
it.
hey, look, there's a chance, Pascal's wager is that thing where it's like, he'd rather believe in God and be wrong than not believe in God. You know what I mean? And be wrong because then, it's awful. So there's a chance that she punched a lot of tickets to heaven and there's a chance that she didn't. I mean, it all depends on like, who knows?
Yeah. So the argument against this criticism of her says that the baptisms provided by the sisters were either desired by the patient or an expression of sincere concern and affection, and that forced baptism is either beneficial or meaningless. So that's an interesting statement. What do they mean by that? It's either beneficial or meaningless. Meaningless meaning it's so late in the game that it doesn't matter. Is that what they're saying?
I think they mean exactly what I was talking about with Pascal's wager. It's either gonna save their lives, or if they're wrong and she's having a crisis of faith, then it doesn't matter anyway. Then they just said some words.
Or they get to those pearly gates and they're like, "Were you baptized?" And they're like, "Yeah," and they're like, "You're not coming in here." They're like, "Damn you, Mother Teresa."
Yeah, I know. It's one of those things, and I think, I don't know. She's a polarizing figure, I guess, as it turns out, but not really. I think you can't really say that she wasn't like she accomplished so much and did so much. So like, we talked about some critiques, but like, let's see how she's really, in India, for example, some of the Hindus there, which is a completely different religion, the biggest religion in India, they regard her as a deity, like one of their gods.
Well, and it's important to even acknowledge that we're talking about there. So we're critiquing this from our Western culture.
Yeah.
Right. And like, we're holding it up to expectations of like our hospitals and our hospices. And that's like a big deal to recognize that we're comparing it to these things, because guess what? They're not here. And, Indian healthcare generally suffered from like a lack of like educated doctors and nurses, limit on the amount of drugs that they had access to, and, a lot of other things. So it's like
a whole, like, what's that place where you can like, have a sandwich with a rat on your lap? You know what I mean? Like there's the temple of rats and they're just rats everywhere. I mean, if you're thinking of like the most disease filled places of the biggest, one of the biggest cities in India, I mean, that's a whole different ball game than what we're talking about. Oh, they don't have, clean sheets here in, Providence or wherever we are.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
I mean, so fine. He can make these critiques, but at the same time, she didn't win a Nobel Peace Prize. That's nothing to sneeze at. She's got honorable doctorates from God knows how many universities, and she's literally sainted, which you have to have completed a miracle. And you said that the jury's not out whether she did that or not. But at the same time, I mean, people genuinely receive her as like one of the greatest people to ever live.
Yeah.
And where do you end up landing on that?
So here is the one statement that to me is the most important.
Okay.
That I read. Mother Teresa never set out to set up hospitals or hospices, but she just wanted to create places for those that the hospitals wouldn't accept. Right there. To me, it means everything. It doesn't, she's not sitting here like saying, "Oh, come to my hospital, come to this lavish home and spend out the rest of your days in luxury." She's saying, if the hospitals won't accept you and you are dying, this is your place. I have a place for you.
So that's where we're ending at, or where we're headed. And I think, Dave, that is about as perfect way to conceptualize this and encapsulate the whole thing, where it's like I'm sitting here struggling, trying to my Catholic guilt is like, you better say something good about Mother Teresa right now, and you hit it on the head. It's, yeah, you can critique her. It's because that's where no one wants to go. No one will take these people, and there has to, except Mother Teresa.
Yeah.
And maybe she was having a crisis of faith, but is that so bad? I really think that.
So here's another thing that came up that makes me wonder if this plays a part in some of that crisis too, and like what her influence from the church was at times, and like why. So I guess there was a priest, Donald McGuire, who was convicted of sexually molesting multiple children, and Mother Teresa was criticized for defending him and urging that he be reinstated into the ministry after he was initially removed. I wonder why.
Well, what are you thinking?
I wonder if there was some level of pressure. I mean, we're just making this up. I have no idea. But
No,
like,
it's fun,
it makes
though.
me wonder
Speculation.
if there's some level of pressure she was feeling from the church. Like, she was starting to feel disconnected from God. That was going on for a while. Why would she be so like so passionate about trying to have this, defending this person and having him reinstated, knowing he did this terrible act that he was convicted of, and she's feeling disconnected from God, and like why would that be an action that would match someone who's kind of like, it's like, it makes me wonder if there was some pressure on her from the church to like have some kind of agenda or some kind of message. I don't know.
Or maybe
And
maybe
like the
she
way they were
lost
portraying her, I don't
maybe she
know.
lost her faith in the church, not in God as much. And that could, maybe it's like a lost in translation kind of thing. It stinks that she was defending the accused.
Yeah.
Um,
Convicted.
yeah, convicted. Yeah, that's kind of a shame. Well, you really screwed up that ending.
Well, I'll go back to, there's criticisms, but then there's rebuttals that I read, and some of these rebuttals were, kind of in line with what I was saying as far as like what her intention was. And I like this one that someone had said, just that she was providing a place for those who had been refused admittance and could at least die being comforted and with some dignity. So that's a nice thing to kind of conceptualize.
Finally, instead of dying in a gutter, they call her like the saint of the gutters. Like, instead of literally dying in a gutter, someone is showing you, treating you, maybe like putting their hand on your head and telling you it's going to be okay, and you pass with some love. That's the last thing. Instead of seeing just like people could care less about you, just complete, cast aside from society. Like,
we get it, Greg. No one loves them. We get it. Really? just being like all alone and in a gutter, and then it's like,
you're
sewer water on you, and
I appreciate you doing that, because sometimes, boy, do I like to hear myself talk.
So this is a good one. Melanie McDonough in The Spectator writes that in large, Mother Teresa was criticized for not being what she never set out to be, for not doing things she never saw as her job. She wasn't the head of government. She didn't address the fundamental causes of poverty, because she was addressing the symptoms, and she did that well. And also, nor were her sisters social workers. So she says, like, she wasn't trying to do anything except treat people at the margins of society as if they were Christ himself.
Wow.
That's it right there. I think that kind of like does summarize my feelings about her. And I'm not going to say like she's a perfect person, because we're able to point out flaws, like, the defending of the for whatever reason that was for. And there were, along the way, there's probably other choices she could have made to try to improve the conditions, maybe, or the treatment. Who knows? She was, and even her doubt in her faith. Not a perfect person.
Faith isn't faith without a little bit of doubt.
It's supposed to be blind faith, Greg.
But well, it's impossible though. None of
Is
us
it?
can do that.
Is
Yes.
it?
Well, if Mother
Is it?
Teresa has the holes in her faith, then yes,
Hey,
I
Greg.
think so.
Greg.
Yeah.
Is it?
Well, I'll tell you I have 100% faith, blind faith in my love for Dave.
Oh, jeez.
I believe in that 100%.
No, you have doubts about it every day.
I do have my doubts.
Like when I'm busting your chops on this podcast.
Yeah.
All right. So at the time of her death, the Missionaries of Charity had over 4,000 sisters, an associated brotherhood of 300 members, operating 610 missions in 123 countries. Pretty good.
That's real good. It's a successful life. She made the world a better place.
Pretty good.
Yep. She made the world a better place, and that's good. And it just goes to show you, dude. I mean, like if you, God forbid anybody goes through like my life with a fine-tooth comb and all my correspondence, which thankfully there's none. It's like, I mean, you can find flaws in anybody.
She was canonized by Pope Francis at her ceremony in September 4th of 2016 in St. Peter's Square in the Vatican City. And tens of thousands of people witnessed the ceremony, including at least 1,500 homeless people from across Italy.
Wow. And this is kind of weird that like you can see a saint, someone who's in the, I don't know if they have a catalog or whatever of saints, like on YouTube. You can see you can see this person like living. That's kind of a cool thing.
Yeah.
And so I'm glad that no one told this little 12-year-old girl to be normal. Because I've just run into that so much with these kids just wanting to fit in and wanting to be normal. And that's not interesting at all. Dare to be different, You're different. You've got this urge to do something different than anybody else. Do it, because that's what makes people interesting. No one wants to tell a story or listen to a podcast about someone who just stayed normal their entire life. They want to listen to something when someone just went for it. And this is.
But if you do want to listen to that podcast, we did an episode about ourselves that you could listen to early in our catalog.
Yeah. So if that does interest you, a couple of guys who played it safe, check that one out. It's like episode 4.
Yeah. Because we said, oh crap, we forgot to do an introductory episode.
Yeah.
4 episodes in. Oh, yeah. All right.
Hey, by the way, Dave, I can tell we're hitting the end here, but I just want to say congratulations on 100 episodes.
Wow. 100 episodes. Look at us.
I mean, who'd have thunk it? Listen, this is 100, relatively speaking, an hour long, episodes. You and I trying to do our best to get people interested in the things that we think are important, that we don't really know too much about, but we try.
100 episodes, and Greg just figured out how to fully use his computer, and we're proud of him for that.
Yeah. Baby steps.
Baby steps.
Anyways, Dave, seriously, thanks for doing this with me for, 100 episodes. This has been, this has brought some meaning to my life for sure. And I know that like we get messages and I don't know if you want to shout out the most recent, as we like to do sometimes, but people, if we touch someone's lives, it's like means everything to us. It gives us motivation to do this next week and the week after. Right.
Yeah, for sure.
So who do we got?
So yeah, we appreciate you guys. It's been a fun journey, and now we're gonna hang it up after our 100 episode. So, no, just kidding.
Ever.
We got like 10 more.
At least,
I think.
Yeah,
at least 10. Yeah, as Greg mentioned, we did get a delightful message from somebody on Instagram, and that was really meaningful. I really appreciate people's comfort with sharing their stories with us from time to time. It's actually wild if you think about it. Just that people can, like, I've experienced this, so I do get it. Like when you listen to people like in this format regularly, you feel a connection to them. I forget, there's a phrase for that. There's a term for that. I can't remember what it is. Oh my God, you should have just seen the smug ass look that Greg just did when I said that. Like this guy probably thinks he's friends with like 15 like podcasters and they have no idea who he is. And he just did this look like, oh, I guess that's a thing that could happen. What are you talking about, Greg? No, but it is. You start, when you listen to things regularly, you get to know their personality and you almost feel like you're a part of it.
Mm.
And I think
Dave needs to do a re-listen to the Imaginary Friends episode.
No, I've had that experience with podcasts, and I've reached out to people as well from shows, and people are doing that to us now, and that feels really awesome. That and I like that people feel they can open up and share, and they respect our opinions about things. So hey, good for you. Good for you. You
means a lot. Leave a review, please, too.
Oh boy. Okay.
Okay.
We know what this guy's head is. He's smirking. He's got all these like smart ass looks on his face. I'm here with you guys.
I am too.
Awesome.
I love them. I love them all. And
I don't know that.
I wouldn't. Yeah, look, if I wouldn't be able to find the time for this, like I do, it means everything.
Greg's in this for the money.
Oh yeah.
I'm just gonna put it out there, people. Greg's in this for the money. We've known this since day one.
We're making money.
Once we start making money, oh man, he's gonna be a monster.
I'm in it, dude. I'm playing the long game. 100 episodes. I'm in it for the money, baby.
So yeah, if anybody feels compelled, we would love the support. You can check out our subscriptions page on Buzzsprout. There's a link for it in our bio on Instagram. We are on X, formerly Twitter, trying to increase some activity on there, but brutal out there, people. But yeah, you can follow us on there, interact with us on there on Instagram, and like Greg said, you could also share a review on podcasts, leave a rating on Spotify. We appreciate it because it really does make a difference. It actually gets the episodes out to more people, algorithms and all that stuff. I hate it, but the necessary evil to beg for this stuff. So if you guys could all do it, then that would make the world of difference for us, and just guarantee that we can keep doing this. I guess get 100 more episodes out, and try to keep this varied and interesting. So that's all I got. Greg, thanks. Congratulations to you as well for 100 episodes. 100 glorious episodes.
Mm-hmm.
And we got way more to come. So
that's right.
We'll be back at it next week. See you then. He doesn't even say bye. That's it's
bye.
Like first the looks,
goodbye, I love
smirks, and then doesn't even say bye.
Looks, smirks, bye.
You have to pay him for the bye, I guess. See you later.